Okay, perfect. So it's a very special honor to have Janet today with us. It's quite a peculiar story because we never met before. We met on Facebook.
I feel like we're soulmates.
Yes, we met like our souls met before. So we met on Facebook. One previous short-term fellow, Yogi Yeager, that some of you might know already, posted something on Facebook. We began commenting about polyamory, and you seemed extremely proficient and knowledgeable about it. And I was very interested in the network science aspect of polyamory, and if anybody had already looked at when we're all going to get connected around the globe through some love relationships, right? And when did that happen? Could we compute that number? And actually, Janet has been extensively and very much in depth looking at that. And so we've been exchanging emails, and she's actually working on like a community in Paris. So she was coming to Paris to study that community, and so we thought that's a perfect timing for doing such a seminar here. So as a background, Janet is a professor of anthropology in Northern Vermont University. So it's the only place with good cheese in the US, right?
Exceptional beer, better than Belgium. I swear to God.
She has studied a lot of polygyny across Mormon fundamentalist groups, and as a fun fact, she actually grew up in the western, in the Wild West, in a ranch, raised to be a cowboy. So in the in the country of Mormon, so in Utah, not so far, right? And she published several influential books on the polyamory and polygamy matters, and the latest one being collaborative and international collaboration on the polygamy question in 2015. Maybe you brought something, all right?
This is one of my earlier pieces, but it's a comprehensive look at polygyny.
And today she will present her study, her most recent study, on the polyamory network in Paris and how to bring social network analysis to that question between ethnography and quantitative analysis. So without further ado, very welcome here at the CRI, and we have 45 minutes. And
the first question to start, why Paris and not?
Okay, why don't we do the questions after this presentation? I promise you it will all become evident, because Paris is the most unique polyamory community that I have seen, and I'm still, waiting to go to Berlin. Berlin, maybe. So I'm going to go quickly through this because I have about 40 minutes of presentation. I'm trying to get it down to 30, as I was told to do. So the abstract first, just so that we can get a clear image of what I was trying to do. This is a study involving multiple sexual partnerships that can be viewed as networks in order to assess the links between lovers and metamors, as well as the larger polypool. A metamor is the lover of your lover. And in such non-monogamous networks, pardon me? Polypool. This is the individual network of each centralized individual with several lovers and metamors. Okay? In such non-monogamous networks, where participants share sex, friendship, ideas, economics, there's a vast web of nodes connected in much more intimate and complex ways than one finds in a mononormative landscape. So my results show that those with high resilience and centrality based on density, homophily, who knows how to pronounce homophily, I would love to know that one, and transitivity, these are typically females with a strong sense of family and talent for interpersonal communication. High modularity shows clustering tendencies aligned with attributes that I have collapsed into categories called kink, atypical intelligence, gender or sexual fluidity, and mitigating factors of race and class. So this is my abstract, and bear with me, I'm going to go through my process. My objectives were to really find out what's the nature of these networks. What do they look like? What is their structure like? How are these people connected to each other? Who has the highest level of influence and resilience? Is it men or women? I have long been an admirer of gender dynamics, and that's what I specialize in. So of course I'm going to ask the gender question. To examine correlates of concurrent involvement in multisexual partnership among 62 Parisians who adhere to the core values of Polyamory Paris Facebook group, a very specific group who number about 300 individuals. And my tools are using ethnographic and social network analysis. And rather than bore you with my literature review, I'm definitely going to have to rapidly go through this, but let me tell you, I have been looking exhaustively for any sign of network applications, and there are none to the polyamory community. So this is the beginning, and this is a place that I would like to initiate a working discussion about that. The poly scholarship I've listed, the social network studies have only the closest I can find has been with social media and sexual networking, with the ideal of finding how sexually transmitted diseases are networked. The other closest proximity to what I'm doing is Johanna, a graduate student, did a tree model of metamor proximity based on philosophy and Plato. It had nothing to do with really looking at mathematically or structurally. And she was the only one that I could have seen that does something similar. There is the L word that created a fictive network. Now this is fictive, but you may know the L word, a lesbian polyamory network. And so this was really one of the things that gave me the idea. I wanted to find out what it looks like in real life. So again, there really isn't anything in the literature. Now in my book, I can't remember which page, I actually provide a network analysis of polygynous wives and polygynous men who are vying for power. But this is in no way related to the modern social network analysis. It's based on ancient graph theory by Per Haag, my advisor. And then Michael Burton in 1980 did something with a log linear analysis that's really so, I can't even call it a serious attempt at network theory. So there really hasn't been anything done. My hypothesis for this project was that the Paris poly will exhibit more endogamy and gender fluidity or sexual fluidity than larger sexual networks. Now what this means is that endogamy is that people will more likely select their sexual partners from within the group rather than outside the group. And that gender sexual fluidity means that they will transcend normal conventions in terms of selecting who they will sleep with, and I will illustrate this. I also hypothesize that the network analysis will show greater centrality and frequency among males. Now I have to set it up that way because the literature suggests, all the evolutionary literature suggests that males are more central to all poly communities and that men have more multiplex sexual partners than women do. So it's a challenge for me to see if this is true. And knowing what my results are already, you know that I found the opposite. So the qualitative analysis is basically selecting a convenient sample of 45 members of the Facebook group that are defined by Polyamory Paris, with extension chain sampling of 17 more. So I meet someone, they tell me about their life, and then they connect me with their metamors or their other lovers or their friends, and then I expand. And I visited Paris on 2 other occasions to begin to create this data set, the subset of the larger 300, and obviously this is a small sample. But if there are only 300 active members of this Facebook group, 700 now we're finding, then 62 is a start. It needs to be a larger sample, but this is a good start. I used in-depth interviews, I went to poly meetings, I discussed people about their lives in cafes, and I utilized participant observation by being as involved and immersive as I could within this community. The demographics show that there are 42% females, 44% males, and again, those who are familiar with the community, please give me feedback on whether you think the 62 represent the larger community. And 13% other gender role identification as non-binary or trans. The age was on average about 32 years, 33 years for males, 30 for females. As far as race, in America and Europe, we think of race differently, obviously. You know, and it is difficult to actually suggest whether it's even relevant in Paris as it is in the United States. But it was predominantly 85 to 86% white or Caucasian individuals. The income was also higher than average, I think middle to upper class. The education was relatively high. Also, the religion was what you would expect amongst polyamory groups, that it's non-structured. It's got more emphasis on spiritual, or that's supposed to be pagan, not pagan. Paganistic spirituality. Pagan is the latest thing. I don't know what it is, but it involves some kind of really interesting ideologies. And love style was predominantly equal anarchist, which means that you don't want hierarchies in your estimation of your network. People that you love are rated equal. If you have 3 people that you're in love with, they're equal to you. They're not hierarchical. That's anarchy. And the hierarchical is basically, I care more about this person than these others. This person is my anchor, my foundation, or my husband, or my wife in some cases. And when I say neutral, I really mean non-applicable. Some people said that they didn't want to answer either or. As far as love structure, there's approximately 28 kitchen table, which is where you bring everything to the table and you get to know your metamours very well, your lovers, and you communicate very openly with them, and you arrange for events, and you have a very open setup. Whereas parallel poly is that you don't really need to know about your lovers. You don't need to know, and so you want to keep that compartmentalized. As far as the interviews, I asked what the nature of their structure was, how did they adopt it. I wanted to find causal factors relating to why they adopted it. I also asked about challenges, though that question didn't become a part of this study. And I found that this community is unique. It's very small, and there's enormous stigma from the outside, more so than what you would find in the San Francisco community. The stigma here is related to a history of aristocracy that is based on clandestine adultery. It's okay if you have an extra fling on the side, especially for men. Just don't talk about it. Don't be honest about it. Cheating's okay. Don't talk about it because it's going to be an embarrassment. And so the society on the outside looks down on this. There's also a lot of patriarchy, a demand for this dishonesty to save face. So with this small community and also the outside stigma, you can imagine that there's going to be some insular activities among these 300 to 700 active participants. The insular endogamous behaviors are similar values regarding consent, respect, open communication, ethical non-monogamy, compersion, where you're okay with your lover having another lover, and that you give that permission. You give that empathy. There's also this insular dating, finding sexual partners within the group, dating lovers or friends, lovers friends. I like you, I like your choice of partner, so I'll sleep with your partner, or that sort of thing. So there's insular sexual attachments. You also have gender sexual fluidity. I mean sexual fluidity, not gender role identity fluidity. So that, and mostly I'm finding it among women, that women are embracing bisexuality with much greater numbers in this particular cohort, and pansexuality. And of course there's sexual and ideological nonconformity, kink, BDSM, swing or échange activities, and a much more open value system around non-conventional sexuality. There is some economic sharing, but not as much as I had expected. There's also what we call a zebra tendency, an extraordinary atypical intellect who fails to recognize social cues and resists engaging in stereotypical behavior. This is Vacin's, I think that's how you pronounce her name, Vacin.
Sio Fachin.
Vachon.
Jeanne Sio Fachin.
Merci. She's written about this extensively, and after going to many poly meetings and talking with people, this seemed to also be part of, well, a tendency, a pattern. And just let me explain, relationship anarchy was mentioned before, and this is a value system that is about 30 to 38% of the individuals espouse to these values of freedom, abundance, individuality, respect, consent, and along with it, other such concepts that you would expect: anti-capitalism, anti-Western binary, anti-heteronormativity, anti-patriarchy. So embracing feminism is part of that ethic, and customizing your relationship with full freedom. And then the sexual nonconformity is listed there below. Sex clubbing, slow love movement, orgasmic meditation are also highly correlated with the interests of this group. So what I found in short, before I get to the formal network analysis, this is my qualitative ethnography. Paris poly is an insular, endogamous, extremely fluid network with high levels of homophily. Links are formed between those who embrace feminism, veganism, love anarchy, predominantly white, liberal, socialist, geeky gamers, ecologically aware, highly educated, upper middle class, but who come from parents who are lower class. They have the same psychological profiles and who are zealous supporters of the same poly ideals and eschew any conventional labels. I'm trying to condense it. Now, this alone is going to be its own paper, okay? But then I wanted to do a conceptual mapping, which is drawing the map like the L word did. So each node is linked, for those of you not familiar with network theory, each individual is called a node, linked to others in terms of sex, money, or friendship with a line. And if the line is thick, it's a multiplex link of money, sex, living together, a very strong relationship, such as a dyad between a person and another who is very dear to them. And I'm going to go ahead and show you this, but I would like to say that star constellations are revealing strong tendencies for non-hierarchical love, and so I'm going to show you this on the larger graph. But here's my legend to show you, and then I'll go back to my initial observations. And this is modified from one that was sent in a blog, a Reed College specialist, and I can give you the source. I've tried to find this mystery person, but I modified it for my own needs, but I've tried to find the source of this, so I'm still in process of doing that. So you've got the node, then the strong dyad. You've got just a small line is sex, dotted line is money, the friendship line, the dashes, and then you've got the triad, which indicates often polygyny, one man, two women, polyandry, one woman, two men, or a unicorn formula, which then would have a line at the bottom. Okay, so it's really difficult to put everything in the legend. A quad, where four people equally love each other. Solo poly, which is one person interested in several individuals. An anarchist star, and just star constellation, is where one individual has many, many individual connections, sexual connections. And then monopoly, where there's one individual just interested in one partner, but that person's partner is interested in many. So what I found in my conceptualization was this, that there was high modularity, networks were emerging, and this is before I put it into the network analysis program called Gephi 9.2. And so this is my conceptualization. I actually had somebody help me with the graphics because I'm not a graphic artist, but I had drawn it all out and I had talked to people again and again, and it emerged. These are polypools, these separate networks emerged, and in it you can see often these constellations. So for example, here is number 17 has a constellation. Number 40 is very famous as a constellation. And they're both anarchists. They both really want to try to make their lovers equal in value to them and not hierarchical. But some relationships are hierarchical. So between 1 and 2, there's a very strong bond. They consider themselves to be permanent partners. They're sharing living space and love, economic sharing. And likewise, this quad is a very strong network of 4 individuals, 2 couples who met and decided that that was enough for them for a long time. And then they expanded. But this quad represents very strong relationships between 4 people. Then you've got the V formation of this 24. This woman is very strong in her constellation. You can see all of the lovers. But as well, she is very devoted to 2 of her partners. These 2 men are very important to her. She shares space and living arrangements with them. And so you can see that hierarchical relationship emerging within her constellation. So as far as a quantitative analysis, I wanted to look for strength, resilience, multiplexity, density. As far as density, the proportion of direct ties in the network and the number of content forms contained in a tie were illustrating some interesting phenomena. And I'll show you this in every case. Women seem to have higher multiplex direct ties than men did in the network. And the multiplexity is related to these formula of kink or zebra or atypical intelligence, queer meaning gender sexual fluidity, and kink, so I've mentioned kink. So these are the 3 areas that I decided to put in. And I found that as far as, let me just go to this, the analysis of these very traits, I found that the zebra, or atypical intelligence, the kink, and the queer were the highest concentration of these traits. And I then counted for the difference between men and women, and I found that women had slightly higher rates of multiple areas of commonality. In other words, they had more of the combined traits. So for example, 17% versus 13% in favor of higher multiplex common areas. And this is going to relate to homophily. I'm just waiting for the correct network analysis to be able to generate some information. And that's why what I really like from you, to see if I can find a way to map that out. Because the only thing I have is an Excel bar chart that really sucks. It's not that exciting. Okay, as far as density, I put in the number of ties of each individual of 62 people, and the number of ties created, again, some aspect of centrality, influence. I also counted the triangles, which is transitivity, and I will show you this. I was also interested in looking at some of these ties, and so when I counted the number of indirect ties, I was able to find that, again, women had higher direct ties and indirect ties. And so their bridging or their weak ties were actually quite significant. Let me show you what it looked like when I put it in Gephi with the help of a mathematician friend from my university. We found that when you put in the number of just direct ties, you get some interesting clusters. And that indicates high modularity, the ability to cluster, or the tendency to cluster. And so within the larger group, it looks like there are many families, these polycools. Now the word polycool is taken from chemistry, right? I think it's the potato that has the polycool formation, but the polyamory community has adopted it to illustrate these networks in one's own life. You've got sexual partners, you've got friends, you've got metamors, and it forms a mini family within the larger network. And you can see that this is not totally different from my conceptualization. My conceptualization found 6 different polycools, and of course the green is phenomenal, and we'll talk about that. And here you find that when mapped here, the center, the female that is in the center of my former green area, is actually in the center of this upper quadrant. So she's connected to a lot of different polycools. So that was very interesting. And that what I had thought about one being off to the side, she appears to be more central than I had thought between these. So that's the beauty of network analysis and the Gephi software. Have you used Gephi before? Maybe, or you find it inferior, I'm sure. I'm just so new to this that we can talk about that later.
Yes.
So the network winners, This is winners in density, bridging, and betweenness. And bridging and betweenness are indirect ties, not the direct strong ones, but those beyond. So what I was looking for is how many indirect ties each node has beyond their direct ties.